you can go to the activity section and respond to that poll. Have you taken a certification course in NEP 2020? Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for responding to the survey. I'll end the poll now. There are many participants who say that they have not taken any course in NEP 2020. Thank you so much for responding to the survey. And I'm so happy to see that we have people from different corners of the country. Thank you so much for joining us here. Okay, I think it's time now. We should start with the webinar. Namaste, my dear brothers and sisters. It's an absolute pleasure for me to welcome you all to a very special edition of ELTAI Webinar. Today marks a significant milestone for us as we conduct our very first online panel discussion featuring not just one, but 4 distinguished experts. This is a new format for us, and we are super excited to bring you a richer and more dynamic conversation on the topic that is very crucial for our education system. The topic is Promoting Inclusivity and Equity in ELT, Strategies Aligned with NEP 2020. I'm Rahul Kale, and I'll be your host for this landmark session. Today's discussion will provide diverse perspectives and practical strategies aligning with the new Education Policy 2020. This is to ensure that every learner has the equal opportunity to succeed. Before we dive into today's engaging topic, let me take this moment to acquaint you with the vibrant world of ELTAI. For those who are new to our community or simply need a refresher, we have a brief video to showcase some of our incredible activities that ELTAI is involved in. Kevin, could you please play the video? wasn't that inspiring? ELTAI's commitment to empowering English language educators across India is truly commendable. Well, before we begin, here are a few important points to ensure everything is running smoothly. I request all the participants to post their questions in the chat box during the webinar. We encourage you to stay with us throughout the session. I also want to inform you about the certificates. Please avoid sending us follow-up emails. We will send you the feedback link at the end of the session in the chat box. Also, the certificates will be issued only to school, undergraduate and postgraduate students, ELTAI members and foreign nationals. We request the PhD scholars to take the membership of ELTAI. Please check your inbox and spam folders for certificate email. Also, please keep a copy of your confirmation email for submitting the feedback and for our verification if needed. We invite our non-members to join ELTAI so that they can access the resources and also be a part of the professional development programs and conferences that we conduct. Friends, today we are going to explore how the National New Education Policy 2020 is paving the way for more inclusive and equitable approach to English language teaching. The goal is to ensure that every learner, regardless of their background, has access to equity education. The discussions that we are going to have today, they will be very insightful, practical, and it will be deeply relevant to all the educators, policymakers, and learners alike. To oversee this discussion, we have a moderator. Let me take this opportunity to introduce our esteemed moderator for today's panel discussion. That is Dr. Vaibhav Sabnis. Dr. Sabnis is an associate professor in the Department of English at Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar Memorial College of Law, Dhule, Maharashtra. With over 2 decades of academic career, Dr. Sabnis is a founder president of ELTAI Khandesh chapter and a distinguished research guide at KBC North Maharashtra University, Jalgaon. He has published over 65 research papers and authored several books, and he is also widely recognized for his contributions to the language and education. We are honored to have you with us, sir. Now, without further ado, I'd like to hand over the session to our moderator. Over to you, Dr. Sabnis.
Thank you, Rahul, sir. I welcome you all to this webinar, a panel discussion on promoting inclusivity and equity in ELT, strategies aligned with NEP 2020. Dear friends, after so many years of association with English, after the independence of India and spending so many crores of money on education, today also we find that millions of people are away from the knowledge of English or the competence in the English language. We see that there is phobia amongst the people, especially from the rural and tribal area, and we see there is that digital divide or divide because of English. We see there is Bharat and India, and many people think that English is one of the most important languages to be successful, though that cannot be the case. So now we have NEP 2020, and we expect that we'll be able to promote inclusivity and equity in English language teaching. So there are many strategies aligned with National Education Policy 2020, which has been already implemented now in many universities, schools, etc. So today we have deliberations on this very important, crucial topic. And for this, we have eminent speakers from different corners of India. First of all, we have Professor Anindya Chaudhary, who is going to talk on policy framework and goals of NEP 2020 for inclusivity and equity, followed by Dr. Vandana Shinde, who is going to talk on assessment practices that support equity in ELT. This will be followed by Professor Arpita Bannerji, who will talk on use of technology to promote inclusivity in ELT. And the last speaker of this panel discussion come webinar is Professor Rajgopal from Hyderabad. So dear friends, today we find that these experts are going to have panel discussion. So we are going to listen to them one by one, and it is imperative to introduce these experts scholars, stalwarts to us. Professor Anindya Chaudhary is a professor in English in the Department of English, Assam University, Silchar. He has a PhD in English, a postgraduate certificate in the teaching of English, and a postgraduate diploma in the teaching of English from EFL University, Hyderabad. He has also a Trinity College, London TESOL, that is certificate in teaching English to speakers of other languages. He's a renowned person who has presented papers in international conferences like Asia, TEFL, held in Vietnam, in Kuching, Malaysia, and in China. Asian EFL conference held in Philippines and Egypt, Black Sea ELT conference in Turkey, English Scholars Beyond Borders conference in Japan, Indonesia, etc. He has also contributed articles to several reputed journals. His current areas of interest include world Englishes, the politics of Englishes, the post-colonial contexts, language literature interface areas like stylistics, post-colonial literatures in Englishes, especially writings in English from India's northeast. Professor Anindya Chaudhary had been to my place, and so this is just an academic introduction that we had, but he is a wonderful human being. He visited one of the colleges near Dhule as the member of peer team of NAC, and such a cooperative, supportive human being with deep and profound knowledge of English and humanity. So this panel discussion is going to be started with this wonderful human being who has a very long experience of teaching, and he has actual, I would say that ground level experience, grassroots level experience, first hand experience of ELT, and he deals with both the sides of the thing. So such a wonderful speaker we have. We have other three speakers. I'll introduce them to you just before their talk. We have Professor Arpita Bannerji, we have Dr. Vandana Shinde, and we have Professor Rajgopal. So we have wonderful speakers from different corners, but I request Professor Anindya Chaudhary, one of the in the parts of introduction, he is my very good friend, to have deliberations on this topic. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Vaibhav. Um, a warm good afternoon to everyone present. I would like to, at the very outset, thank ELTAI for inviting me to be a part of this webinar. Now, what I would be doing is I'd be talking about inclusivity and equity in the NEP 2020 document. In general, I wouldn't be focusing on English or English language education. After me, the three other panelists, they would be focusing on specific areas, certain specific areas like assessment, as has already been pointed out by Vaibhav, assessment, the technology and teacher education, with regard to inclusivity and equity in English language teaching. But I would be talking about things in general, only certain ideas in the time that is available. One thing which I experienced in webinars or seminars or workshops pertaining to NEP 2020 is that people often go gaga over the positives of the NEP document. But what I would be doing is I'd be looking at some of the ideas critically, especially with regard to inclusivity and equity. The phrase critical thinking, by the way, I just looked up a while back. In the NEP document, it occurs 7 times. So taking a cue from this, I would like to put forward my views for your consideration. If there is time available, then of course we'll be deliberating further on this. The first thing that we need to think about is the way in which we are thinking about the term inclusion. I think it is better to think about it in a broad way to include various parameters like gender representation, issues pertaining to infrastructure, even inclusivity with regard to curricular practices. So I'd be touching upon certain points and maybe critiquing certain points which I feel, um, you know, which I feel, uh, people should be critiquing more, a little more than they usually do. This has been my experience. Equity, of course, pertains to ensuring fairness in educational opportunities, and inclusion and equity are often thought about together. So if you look at the document, there are two chapters, two sections, or two chapters, as the NEP document calls them, chapters, chapter 6 and chapter 14, where we have the document primarily talking about inclusion and equity, chapter 6 dealing with school education, and chapter 14 with higher education. Now, when we talk about inclusivity in the NEP 2020 document, we must say that it begins brilliantly by referring to another document which we should be reading um, along with the NEP document. That is the UNESCO 2017 document, Education for Sustainable Development Goals. So goal 4, the NEP document on page 3, if I'm not mistaken, this document, by the way, was adopted. I'm talking about the UNESCO document. It was adopted by India in 2015. So goal 4 of that document seeks to ensure, and the NEP document refers to this on page 3, so it seeks to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all by 2030. So with regard to this, one of the first things that we find in the NEP document is the extension of the right to education eligibility window from 6 to 14 years to 3 to 18 years. It is in that sense a little more inclusive. It brings within the ambit of formal education, even pre-primary learning. So with a goal of having 100% of children school ready by 2030, the policy pushes for the universalization of early childhood care and education. The document talks about the investment in infrastructure such as play equipment and child-friendly buildings, as well as continuous professional development, CPD, of ECC teachers and Anganwadi workers through a 6-month certification program, including some online components. However, what seems to be lacking in the document is clarity around whether every Anganwadi or pre-primary learning center will be equipped with a high-quality teacher or a worker, Sevika. So when it comes to infrastructure, the policy talks about merging and closing existing schools considered suboptimal. This word suboptimal is used in the document. It also talks about increasing public-private partnerships and training teachers in spatial education and so on and so forth. Now, with regard to the first thing, that is with regard to the merging or the closing of existing schools which are considered to be suboptimal, should we not consider the fact that closing the existing small schools will further vulnerabilize the marginalized children? So the vulnerability of the marginalized children ought to be taken into account while considering this idea of merging or closing existing schools, I believe. So instead of this, we may wish to stress the importance of the policy's proposal to invest in substantially improving existing public schools. Additionally, that's a very positive point with regard to the NEP document, that we should be bolstering this public-private partnerships in education, which will invariably bring new private players into governance who could assume authority over policy and reform. Another important point is with regard to enhancing teacher quality. So even though enhancing teacher quality to retain learners in a school is a very significant policy focus of the NEP document, it doesn't offer insight into how teachers from marginalized communities or marginalized groups will be recruited. This is one issue which is, I think, very important, because when we are talking about a higher sense of belonging among marginalized learners, something that the document talks about, this possibly will develop only if there are teachers from those communities in the schools. So how that is going to happen, that has not been talked about in the document, referred to even once possibly in the document. So this is one thing. Another thing is in terms of teacher training. I don't particularly like this expression, teacher training, teacher education, but then okay. So in terms of teacher education, of course, Professor Rajgopal will be dealing with that extensively in his session. The NEP proposes offering special education courses. So in this context, of course, we need to ensure how teachers, both current and future, equipped with not only theoretical knowledge, but also practical skills to teach diverse learners. So that is something which is very important. Now, one of the highlights of the NEP document is, of course, the way in which it recognizes the fact that children from marginalized groups account for most dropouts and low enrollment. So the policy proposes two main approaches to tackle the issue of enrollment and attendance. Number one, ensuring infrastructural provisions in schools to make them safe and engaging for all learners. And number two, tracking children's presence in schools as well as their learning through community engagement. Now, while this is all right, the policy seems to run the risk of disadvantaging children from marginalized groups further by creating this new term, which I have great problems with personally, socioeconomically disadvantaged groups. So this is a new category which has been created by subsuming many, many categories. And also another thing which is a sort of cordoning off the disadvantaged geographical locations by calling them special education zones, SEZs. So I believe that there is a possibility of the ghettoization of marginalized communities through the creation of these kinds of zones, especially when we consider the already stratified nature of the school system in India. So that's one thing. Then another thing with particular regard to the issue of gender inclusivity, one must say that the NEP document admirably recognizes the transgender children. This was not there in the earlier documents in the 1986, 1992 document, or even the first one. But then it also seems to exclude children who belong to the other LGBTQIA plus identities. So that's something. We have a mention of transgender children, but we don't have a mention of, say, the other categories. That's, of course, there. But then the NEP 2020 document, of course, has two important policy interventions associated with the transgender students, namely identifying them. First of all, this is something which is very important, identifying them as a category where the gap towards access to education is a question, while also including them in another significant thing, significant intervention, the second one that I was talking about, the Gender Inclusion Fund, whereby the policy seeks to provide equitable and quality education for them. However, While the policy talks about an integrated teacher education program, there has been no shift of formulating the inclusion of teachers who do not identify themselves within the binary cis heteronormative structures prevalent in the social imagination of the Indian nation state. As in a very short but very significant write-up by Meher Chandani, published in EPWD, which I looked up recently, he talks about that. So the important question is, if the system does not allow a teacher who does not align with the cis heteronormative structures, how would they be able to provide equitable and fair access to transgender queer students that the NEP 2020 talks about? So without an equal working space for queer individuals within school systems, the learners are just exposed to the binary way of life, irrespective of the differing ways that the society actually functions in the everyday. We were aware of one particular case in 2021 when the National Council of Education Research and Training, NCERT, had to remove a teacher training manual on transgender inclusive education in schools in 2021 after a stiff resistance from the dominant caste, class, gender lobbies that wanted to keep the hegemony of the heteronormative binary categories existing in the original form. So in the context of this, how those issues would be taken on board, that particular thing needs to be seen. Or are we just merely giving lip service to this issue? That's one particular thing. Then with respect to disabled children, of course, the policy quotes the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act 2016 to define inclusive education and so on and so forth. So that's another thing which is very important, I believe. Another thing, when we talk about inclusivity and equity, inclusivity in education, be it at the school level or the higher education level, is how the NEP document talks about the learner-centered pedagogical processes. So learner, and this is something I must point out that this is something which is not novel, because even the 1986 policy, national policy on education, talks about that. But this particular document adds a couple of things which becomes important. Learner-centered pedagogy has been viewed as an educational approach that is inherently inclusive and values students' agency while improving learning by applying constructivist theories of learning. But the policy's implementation possibly will require a shift away from the notion that students are objects of educational reform to agentic subjects. This is all the more important in the context of the rather adult-centric school education system that we have in India. So I believe that these points we need to take into account. There are many other points, but I think my time has come to an end with regard to this. I'm looking at the clock. It's I think I covered some of the areas which I needed to focus upon, and we'll continue with this discussion on the basis of what the other panelists have to say with regard to access and with regard to inclusivity and equity. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Anindya. Well begun is half done, and you started wonderfully, very spontaneously, to the point, very relevant. And what I liked, or what is the important highlight of your talk, is that you talked about the marginalized, not just students, but teachers.
Yeah.
If students are there, how the teachers would be there to address their issues. And then, of course, another very marginalized community, we would say, is still not very, very acceptable to our society. because of many things are the transgenders. So these
Yes.
two issues who are marginalized in our society, and how NEP is going to, address their issues. That is
Yeah.
what I would
So,
say. Yeah,
so including the transgenders in this document, that's a great leap forward. But I was talking about the gaps which exist, right?
yeah.
Thank you so much.
The gaps are still there, and they need to be bridged. And what you put forth is a very balanced view. You are not a blind follower of the policy, nor an admirer, but you did point out the loopholes and the things that need to be addressed. So, hope that there will be inclusivity and equity, and there will be some revisions and amendments in the policy. There are some questions which we'll take towards the end of this webinar. Now we have another esteemed speaker amongst us. After Professor Anindya Chaudhary from Silchar, Assam, we have Dr. Vandana Shinde, a linguist and ELT expert, ESL and EFL trainer, teacher trainer, language examiner, content developer, NLP practitioner. She's a distinguished linguistic with an experience of over 20 years. She has been an associate professor at Tolani Maritime Institute since 2006, and she has been working as a developer. She has been there in training and language examination. She has successfully led significant projects, including the English Communication and Soft Skills online program for the Directorate General of Shipping India, enhancing the skills of teachers and trainers in maritime training institutes. As an examiner for the International Language Test, Dr. Shinde has contributed to maintaining high standards in language proficiency assessments. Dr. Shinde is an active member of English Language Teachers Association of India, and she has published many papers. Her academic achievements are notable because she has done her PhD in linguistics, focusing on the language used by Indian settlers. She has done MPhil on binding principles of English and Marathi, and advanced degrees in English and human resources. She is also a certified NLP practitioner. Dr. Shinde is proficient in digital media, projecting planning and execution, team leadership, and developing need-based educational materials. Her commitment to excellence is further demonstrated by her involvement in various professional development trainings, including the National Education Policy training, rational emotive behavior training, and curriculum development courses. So we can say that she's the right person to talk on this, because already she has worked a lot on NEP. Today, we expect her to talk on assessment practices that support equity in ELT. May I please request on behalf of ELTAI and all of you, Dr. Shinde, please interact with us, guide us.
Thank you very much. I think that was a long introduction, but yes, the topic which was given to me is, definitely was pretty challenging, because I wanted to see how the assessment practices can be connected with the equity in ELT, and then with the NEP, and how we go about it, right? So while I was even discussing with my colleague, Mr. Rahul Kale, and we were like, what should I do? What should I present? So one thing that came to my mind was about this a survey. I wanted to actually conduct a poll here, but then we thought, can we have a survey? And thanks to the team that they helped me in actually reaching people. For today's my talk, these are the three objectives and scope that I would like to say. What do we understand by language assessment practices? What do we understand by equity in ELT? And how would knowledge of language assessment support equity in ELT? And then I'll try to come to NEP in brief, like how we can, what are the provisions made in NEP, or what NEP says about it, right? So as I said, I conducted a survey, and I must thank over here all those participants who took the the survey, and they helped me in coming up with some results out of it. So these were the main 3 areas which I focused. What are my assessment practices? How creative am I while preparing the question papers for language assessment, and what support do I get from my organization? It's very important as teachers. We need to have good support from the organizations in order to excel in whatever we have to do. And the options given were always, sometimes, never, not sure, not applicable. Yeah, so can we move to the next slide? Yeah, here I can see, I mean, we can see that there are only 118 responses, but I was just checking my response sheet, and by now I have almost received 150 responses, and that's a pretty big number. And once again, I would like to thank all people, I mean, all those respondents. Well, looking at this chart over here, you can see that most of the responses are from the, undergraduate programs level and from postgraduate level, but very few from the school level and, the higher secondary level. Yeah, can we move to the next slide, Rahul? Yeah. So about set 1, where I wanted to check about how do we assess. So these are some of the questions which I had put. I assess the listening, speaking, reading, writing skills of the students for internal assessment. Now, surprisingly, I was very happy to see that majority of people did say, always they follow these kind of, practices. This is internal assessment. I try to have these 2 aspects, like internal and external, because we do have a lot of assessment practices where during formative assessment, we are doing certain such assessment activities in our classrooms as well. So I wanted to ask, I wanted to know whether people are following certain practices or not. So you can see the results are here. Again, if you concentrate on the part where I'm asking about, I assess only reading and writing skills of the students for the internal assessment. You can see even here, I've got some people who said always and some people who said sometimes, right? So now this is like we have to maybe think about it, how we can go ahead and how we can have all the skills, as part of our assessment. If the last question, now Rahul, can you just go to the previous slide again? Yeah, the last question of this set was, I assess the listening and speaking skills of the students. And here I did get some good response where people said always and sometimes. Like, again, this is something which we can take forward and discuss, right? All right, can you go to the next slide, please? Yeah. Now, the second set was about, using material. How do we prepare our question papers while we are assessing the language proficiency of the students? So I use authentic material. Again, here also you'll see that in some cases we did have, like, always teachers are using authentic material, or they're using question papers based on needs of the students. They're preparing, the papers in such way. Only when you look at the second, third, and fourth question over here, customize the material used for question paper based on the needs of the society and the needs of the industry. I can understand that some of us may not have really understood, are we really preparing our students for the society and for the industry? And I must say that yes, we are, and we have to think about it. So our students are not using language only at the school level or at the college level, but of course, or for passing the examinations at different levels, but for when they go into the workplaces, they have been using, or they have to use language over there. So from that perspective, I had used these questions over here. Another thing that I talked about industry over here is because we in our college, I'm from Tulani Maritime Institute, and we have students coming after 12. Now you can imagine that when the student with that level comes to our college, it is a basic requirement that he's able to communicate well in English, but then unfortunately that doesn't happen. And so many times we have to really focus on the basic skills of language, right from speaking, listening, and all those basic things. So I thought, like, how can we prepare these students if they were not prepared in last 10, 15 years, 10 or 12 years? How can we prepare them in just 2 or 3 years for the industry? And we do have companies coming to our college like maybe in second year or in third year for placing these students. So that was a challenge, and that's why I had put this question. Like many other places also, this might be the same situation. And the fifth question over here was a little tricky when I wanted to see like MCQ format of language assessment. So are we using it? And you can see it's very clear that yes, always, and sometimes many people are using MCQ format for language assessment, which is also used in many of the examinations, especially the the competitive exams, like the JEE exams or the NEET exam or any other exam which is a competitive part of competitive examinations, where MCQ type of format is used, and basically there we have comprehension questions or we have grammar and vocabulary based questions. But then do they really give us proficient in English kind of an individual out of it? That's really a question over there. So yeah, next slide, please. Now here, this was about the support from the management, and I was happy that majority of people did say that they have been receiving support from the management, which is really maybe a very positive side of what we are going forward to. Because when we think about NEP and the kind of requirements the NEP has put up for the language teachers particularly, if we get support from the organization, only then that would be possible. So if teachers are saying that yes, they have support from the organizations, that's really a good sign. Here you can have a look at different questions. The last question here again was a bit little, I wanted to see like whether language assessment needs a different approach than the specific the other subjects. And there also I could see that most of the teachers have said yes, or rather they said always. Now here my intention was, normally what happens is English or language testing is always considered similar to maths, science and other subjects, but that's not the case. If you are keeping, let's say 20/80 kind of a thing, internal assessment 20 and external assessment or final exam or written paper as 80%, something like that, whatever, 30/70, 20/80, then when it comes to language, we are being unjust to the speaking and the listening component, because we are not giving equal weightage to that. So again, the skills, when we assess the skills, there can be issue with that, and the students may not be really very good in these skills because they are not studying, they are not preparing, they are not allowed to think about those two skills maybe. So that was the reason why I had put that last question, and yes, most of the teachers have said we have to have that. Well, so that was about the survey which I conducted, and I got a very good response. I'm very happy and I'm very thankful to all the participants. Now, coming to the language assessment practices, what are the current practices in most of the universities and states also? We have formative assessment and we have summative assessment. So as we know that formative assessments is a process oriented. So we have class tests, assignments, and there are some marks. In some places, of course, there is 50-50% weightage given. In some places, it is, as I mentioned earlier, also it could be 20/80 or 30/70. But then formative assessment is taking place in various boards and universities. Then there is summative exam assessment, which is product oriented, and we have term end exams, university exams, and board exams. So this is the current language assessment practices. Now, after just going through these current language practices, I can say that, I mean, or I'm sure you all will agree that when we come across students, when they complete a certain level, do we really see that there is a change in the student? Let's say if the student is admitted in first year in the higher college, in the let's say undergraduate program, and once he passes from from the university or the college, what is the level of language competency? I mean, do we really see a change? If the change is seen, that means we are really doing, I mean, there is a some progress happening. But if the change is not seen, especially when it comes to language usage, then something has to be, there. I mean, we need to worry about it. So that's why I thought I put the word like current language assessment practices. Yeah, next slide. So I thought, like, what could be the ideal language practices, which most of the, universities and colleges, or maybe sometimes autonomous bodies are doing, in fact, and they're practicing it, and actually they show the change. You can measure also. There is a a proper noticeable change in the students when they enter and when they exit from various courses. So what makes those people, competent, or how this happens, how this change happens? So probably these are some of the ways in which the language assessment practices happen at those places. Like one is skill based. So when we talk about LSRW, listening, speaking, reading, and writing, if all the skills are given equal weightage and they are equally assessed, probably we can say yes, the student or the candidate has these competencies. We can grade it or we can talk about it. So that's what most of the international exams are doing, and that's in fact what is mentioned in the CEFR, that Common European Reference of Framework, which talks about all these things. And it also talks about how a particular student is assessed at the international level, which is available online. It is nothing which is secret, right? And most of the languages across the globe are following the same pattern. So why can't we follow the pattern in our country when we are doing the language assessment at our schools and colleges? That's always been a question to me, and probably we have to find some solutions to these questions, right? So second Rahul, can you go back? Yeah. Second part is about project-based assessment. So are we really considering making students do the projects and make presentations, group presentations, whereas a group work or do some research? Are we putting them in some kind of activity and then making them go through the process of a lot of things happen during that process, and then make the presentations in the form of actual presentations in the classrooms, or writing reports and all, something like that. So project-based assessments can help can help us to find change in the students. Oral assessments, interviews, debates, GDs. Now these are very important because this is what is happening nowadays in the placement cells also. So when the companies come to us, they actually take the students through all these kind of different processes. So are we preparing our students for this? So that's the oral assessment part. So we can use these techniques over there. Continuous internal evaluation, assignments, presentations, and class participation. So every class something happens and we evaluate that, or we process that. So that's how students learn. Giving feedback, immediate feedback is possible when classroom activities are conducted in this, when assignments are done. So you can actually see a progress in a student who follows this kind of way. The self-evaluation, peer evaluation, that's criteria based. Can we tell our students like how to evaluate our own self as well as to evaluate our peers? Because that's what the teachers are doing. That's how the evaluation is happening at the final, So, if we give them the criteria, they understand what to look for. When they look for those criteria in their peers, they try to understand, okay, where are we? And they learn from each other. So that's another thing which is a very ideal way of doing it. It might seem a bit little difficult to follow, but I must say that we have been following in our college and we are getting good support from that, and it works, it helps, right? Okay, next slide, please.
Excuse me, madam, your time is up.
Just need 2-3 minutes more. So equity in ELT is something which talks about different students may need different support and resources to achieve similar outcome. This is what equity means. It involves recognizing and addressing the diverse needs of students and implementing teaching practices that allow each learner to achieve their full potential. So this is what equity in ELT means. Can we go to the next slide? Now, while going through the NEP handbook, these are the places where I could actually find assessment. The word, if you type assessment and look for it, it appears 76 times in the entire document, and you can see the new concept of National Assessment Center is coming up according to NEP, which will include self-assessment and peer assessment, which I talked just now, in addition to a lot of other things which I mentioned in the ideal practices that we can think about. I've given the page numbers also. So these are the references. I've just picked up some of the places where the word assessment appears and which really can help us in using those tools in our classroom activities. Yeah. Next slide, please. Can you just go to the next? I'll just skip this. Yeah. So how to bring this equity in ELT and assessment? Form a team, identify the needs, make a list of it, design a strategy of teaching, defining the learning outcomes at every level, assess the learning in a structured program, try to bring all at the same level before going on to the final or end sem examinations. and analyze the result and plan the next action. So if these processes are followed, or this technique is followed, I'm sure it might help us to, bridge the gap in certain places if possible. Yeah. So thank you very much for your patient hearing, and sorry, I just took a little more time because I wanted to discuss the survey as well. Well, we can take up some questions in the end after all the discussions are done. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, madam. I think under NEP, there is PARAK that is going to focus on the assessment, that is
Yes.
going to look after the assessment and all. And yes, even after so many years of association, the basic skills need to be improved, and the self-assessment and the assessment of peers. So that is something has been done and should be done, so that we can bridge the gap and equity can be ensured. Because we have been talking about equality, but somewhere we need to talk about equity, because just giving equal opportunities is not enough to bring the marginalized, the downtrodden, those who are away from education or ELT in particular. So to bring them in the mainstream, we need some extra efforts. We need to ensure that there is equity at the level of assessment as well, because we cannot have the same yardstick for all. So thank you so much for a very wonderful talk. And now we have Professor Arpita Bannerji, madam. She has worked for several years as a senior reader, Institute of English, Kolkata, a teacher training institute sponsored by Government of West Bengal. Her major interest areas include teacher training, applied linguistics, syllabus design, materials production, research, and phonetics. A recipient of the prestigious Commonwealth Scholarship, Professor Banerjee specialized in materials production at the Victoria University of Manchester, UK. She has worked as language training consultant and examiner of British Council, Kolkata. She has conducted workshops not just in India, but abroad in Nepal, Bangladesh, Bangkok, and other countries. And she has worked as the chief local resource person with experts from UK, the British Council training programs, etc. And she has conducted several workshops, presented many papers, published many books on grammar and skill development. So we have such a wonderful personality today. Instead of listening about her, it is better to listen to her. So I request Professor Arpita Bannerji to talk on the use of technology to promote inclusivity in ELT. Technology is something very important, and it's very interesting to mention that a retired professor is going to talk on technology. It shows the importance of technology today also for the older generation and more to the digital literates of today. Over to you, madam.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's my great pleasure today to be addressing on this very relevant topic, not very contemporary, I should say, but since we're talking in alignment with NEP 2020, it certainly is. So with the three issues that have already been mentioned, that is equity, equality, and empowerment, we're going to see how these are related. Yes, Rahul, we'll go on to the next, the session agenda, which I'm not really going to highlight much, because the concept of inclusive ELT has perhaps been inadvertently referred to by Dr. Anindya Chaudhary, but the alignment is what we're going to talk about, and the applicability of technology in inclusive learning and teaching. And also I'll be sharing my personal experience of promoting learner autonomy through multiple media. Can we move on, Rahul, please? Yes. Well, these were the things that I sort of found to be rather common, since I've been associated with language policy documents and, of course, teacher training for I don't know how many years now. But I find that there is one particular aspect that I found to be a little different from what we had been advocating. That is, one is, of course, the community acceptance. That was very important to me here. And my interest area would be in terms of how English language teaching could contribute to fulfilling all these aims of mother tongue emphasis we've been talking about for the last so many years. Language flexibility perhaps is something new. Inclusive education is not really new, because ever since I started teaching, we've been talking about inclusive education also. So infrastructure support has always been a worrisome issue for all of us, but how we can manage within whatever we have, our limited resources, this is what we're going to talk about. Can we move on, Rahul, please? Yes, well, of course, please move on. This, of course, I'm talking about, this brings to me, the Cuban poet who had said it, well, long years and years back. He was talking about the right to learn. That is the natural happy pace. And that's where we talk about equity and equality. He was talking about this, I think, way back in somewhere in the 19th century, where he was talking about giving the learner the ability to walk alone. That is what the right of education was. Yes, as we move on now, if we talk about inclusivity in ELT, then is there really a paradigm shift in English language teaching? Well, I noticed there are certain I factors, I call them, in the document. That is, the internationalization is one word that has been perhaps used instead of globalization. There is a lot of interplay as well as interdisciplinary involvement. By that, of course, I understand that including technical education into the ELT premises is something it's not a real innovation, but certainly there is a kind of emphasis on that. So when we come to the E factors here, well, we're talking about, of course, English, thinking in terms of equity and equality and also economy. And since we are talking about the extensive use of technology, well, will that be an economizing factor? So how do we align the I and the E factors in terms of the NEP document? Yes, we'll move on now, please, Rahul. Yes. Okay, so 2000 onwards, there has been, globalization has really become a volatile term. We're talking about English moving on as a functional language to create a galvanizing impact on the global scenario. And therefore, well, it was used in media for social sites, text messages, emails, and all that. English has been out in the open market for quite some years now. I think ever since we started thinking about it in the mid, I think it was long back when we started really thinking in the 80s, 90s, it went on. But now what I really think the NEP has introduced, and is perhaps for us to think, that is, we are not going to treat it as a measure of intelligence or as a prestige language. We're going to think of English to be used for convenience. And that is where the use of technology, I think, becomes more pertinent. Yes, please move on now, Rahul. Yes. So let's look at the average classroom in context. Nothing has changed because it still remains, the average Indian classroom still remains a tool where we think in terms of vertical relationships, that is culturally, contextually, socially, and now, of course, the gender bias has come in, which is, of course, very important. So the classroom context remains the same. We have a wide variety of learners from all over. And there, of course, the basis is to make a global Indian in India. So the responsibility in the classroom for the teacher. If we look at the classroom itself, before we look at the learner, let's think of the teacher in the classroom. We have still the teachers who are perhaps trained, not so well trained, skilled, maybe not skilled. They also come from different areas, tribal, rural, urban, everywhere. And the learner remains the same. We have enabled, differently abled, tribal, rural, urban, all that, privileged, underprivileged. Now, so we're trying to bridge the gap. So using English and technology, are we going to consider equity or equality? By equity, I notice a number of questions coming in that how do we distinguish between the two? Well, equity, of course, we're thinking of the individual learner, the needs of the individual learner. How are we going to cater to that? And equality, that everyone has equal rights to the English language, to use it as one wants to. Well, let's move on, Rahul, please. Yes. Okay, so I'm not going to really remain very long on this slide because I'm just going to refer to some of the early tools that we used. We used to use phone, the flashcards, the radio, well, some cassette recorders were used in the classrooms, calculators, overhead projectors. But as far as I remember, not many teachers were using these, even they were available, accessible, but still they were not using them. Now we moved on because we're using a lot of AI tools like Meta, Copilot, Gemini, Canva. We have the ebooks, online guides, we have WhatsApp, we have everything. So, well, we have so much, the resources have widened, but are we really ready? So what is the role of the teacher in making the general use of these resources? And where is the emphasis on the learner? When we think in terms of equity and equality, and we think of all these technological resources that we have, how are we going to actually use this in the English classroom? Yes, Rahul, let's move on. Right. So we're trying to create a symphony through ELT, but are we ready? The main challenge is, do we have the same group of teachers, perhaps freshers? So, well, hiring skilled teachers, or reskilling or retraining job holders, designing skilling programs that are effective, scalable, and sustainable. And as you know, learner autonomy is nothing new. We've had it for years now. So, but then the focus is now, I think there is flexible delivery from various platforms. They are free to learn, well, face-to-face or online, on-site, on campus, on job. But the main thing is the entire, the convenience part of English language teaching now is that they should be ready for employment. So the signaling value has to be there in our teaching. So let's move on now. Yes. Well, then we have, so the media resources, there's nothing new. We are all aware of all what we have on the left. So the Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, Twitter, everybody, I think almost everyone has a mobile phone, but then who uses it for teaching or learning English, I would say? Which of these are more accessible? Are the chatbots going to help us? So which promotes the use of English? I think all of them do. Why is one question. We all know why, but how? That is the major challenge for us today. Let's move on now. Yes, well, the more accessible channels I'm going to come through now is the radio, because I have a fascinating experience of using the radio for promoting English language teaching. Well, if you think about the radio, well, it is accessible, it's comfortable, and the equity part of it is there because it has equal access for all students, regardless of ownership. They can sit together and listen. It's flexible, anytime, anywhere. And there's a lot of engagement also. There's different kinds of programs are available with all these FM channels and all that. So ELT-related lessons, drama, exciting programs, anything is available on the radio. Can we move on, Rahul, please? Yes, so this was my experience. I was lucky to be a part of Netaji Subhash Open University. Please, yes, Rahul? Yeah. So Netaji Subhash Open University, I worked there for 5 years. And there, of course, we have, yes, can we go back to the previous slide, please, Rahul? Just a minute, yeah. So they have their own channel, Gyanvani, FM 105.4. And I was asked to design a 1-hour program. Right, a 1-hour program. They said, why don't you take up a 1-hour talk? So the philosophy interested me, that is reaching the unreached, respecting the right to learn, as any open university would do. So I decided that I was not going to do just a talk show. It was going to be a live interactive program through the distance phone on radio. So can we have it in the next slide, please? Yes. So the assumptions on which I worked was that there is no critical period for developing language skills. And family environment nourishes learning. And the thing is, if you talk about community acceptance, as I noticed in the NEP 2020, well, this was a good opportunity for me to encourage them to become members of imagined communities, because this would stimulate the language learning process, because successful language learners imagine themselves in imagined communities. So as I said, now let's move on, Rahul. So I'd like to just give you a glimpse into what I did. Yes. So the listener profile, as you listen, yes. So we had all these listeners. It was a 1-hour show every Monday, right, from 6 to 7. And I didn't know who were my listeners, but they kept on and on increasing and expanding. And later on, I learned that they were from different areas. They were socially, physically advantaged, disadvantaged, the able and the differently abled. And there were, all kinds of motivated listeners from 8 to 80. I conducted 128 sessions over 2 years. And I must say, by the end of the 100th session, within that 1 hour, I was getting 40 telephone calls. So there was a lot of telephone calls. We were all talking in English. Yes, let's move on to the next slide, please, Rahul. Yes. So this was, if you notice what I have on the left, was the university provided me the channel, and they also provided some kind of connectivity, allowing me to use it. And I developed the content, and I also actually I did use the Connect system in the way that I did. I'll talk about that a little later. And the code was a mixed code. I was mainly using English, but I was using a bit of my mother tongue also for affective purposes. And the program was so interesting. It was absolutely contemporary. Whatever I picked up, the headlines from the day and all, we were talking about it. And there's a bit of translation. It was all mixed code. And a lot of it was very stimulating. Let's move on, Rahul. Yeah. So what did listeners actually do? Well, there you are. They were strategizing, because the kind of things that I asked them to do, they were listening and predicting, thinking, reacting, commenting. So, they were using the critical thinking skills. And the main takeaway was that they felt interested, motivated, appreciative. Yes, Rahul, one more click I think we will need. Yes, so they felt responsible. And the best thing was that they looked forward to the next session and any opportunity to use English. So that was my major takeaway from the program. And what did I do to sustain interest and avoid attrition? Well, this is what I did. Extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. And my major, issue was that there should be no attrition. I wanted to go on expanding my listener community. And therefore, I was praising and all that. Yes. Yes.
Excuse me, madam. Yeah. Please conclude, madam.
Sorry, time is up. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I will move on. So why radio? I think we can now, so the pluralistic character of the listeners was addressed. So let's move on. I think we can go on. Yes. So these were some of the reactions. It was covered by NDTV. Just move on, Rahul. Let's move on to the next slide. I had sightless things, and this was my team. We were also working in a team. If you notice, the listeners were using Braille also while they were listening. This is extreme motivation. Let's move on. Yeah. So, well, the radio was a tool. Yes. It did provide, yes. But the thing is, how do we do it? How do we do it? This is the main thing. The power of the radio-driven experience was there. Yes, just move on, Rahul. Let's move on. Yeah. Okay. So the liberated learner, I find this now very relevant with the NEP document. So, but then we have many more resources today. How do we use them? How do we involve them? How do we make each learner responsible for his own learning? Do we allow them to work at home with their mobile phones and all that? This is what we can talk about later, maybe. So, well, it's evolving. The entire English language teaching system is evolving. So we want to make English as a language of convenience. So let's move on, Rahul. So we now come to the end of it. The thing is that we're looking for a goal whenever we have any program. Now, but the problem with this particular goal is that it keeps on moving, because every day a new tool comes in and we have to go on, adjusting with that tool. So what's the point in having a goal? The point is we keep walking. We keep walking. So thank you very much. And let's have many more happy hours of ELT and technology. Thank you.
Thank you so much, madam. You started with right to learn and how technology. And in technology, you focused on radio. That is a bit outdated for the younger generation that is holding mobile and other gadgets in their hands. But you did emphasize how your experience, first-hand experience, worked like a miracle for bringing inclusivity and equity, and how you work for the differently abled people also, students also. That was really commendable, remarkable, and appreciable. Thank you so much for this very wonderful talk. Now we have the last speaker, Professor Dr. G. Rajgopal. He is the former professor who served in the English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad. Coincidentally, when he started teaching, I was born. So such a vastly experienced person We have retired from IFLU in 2013, and then he worked in Muscat and Yemen also. He has worked as the teacher trainer and resource person for training in ELT as well as training in the corporate world as well. He has authored and edited several books as well. He has worked as the dean also, member of Karnataka State Textbook Committee, and both studies in English in many universities. Then he has also worked as the member of National Academic Advisory, MHRD, Chairman Core Committee for Preparation of a Position Paper for Teaching. He has organized many national, international seminars, conferences, etc. And he has also participated in many events of this importance. So we have such a renowned, highly experienced personality with us, and he is going to have deliberations on teacher training and professional development for inclusivity in ELT. Over to you, Honorable Sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vaibhav, sir. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's such a pleasure to be on this platform and to address all of you. I'm basically going to tell you a few things related to the concerns that have been expressed in the NEP relating to the teachers. Fortunately, the document talks extensively about the role of teachers. This is very good simply because we all know that the teachers are the ultimate doers, whatever it is. You know, in the sense that whatever be the policy, whatever be the recommendations, whatever be the suggestions, the implementation of all these heavily depend on the teachers. And therefore, teachers, their roles, responsibilities, and as a consequence, their own background, their own training, their readiness, etc., they all play a very major role. I will focus mainly on what NEP tries to suggest with regard to teachers' preparation. Look at this. Now, the most important thing here is the new system, which is going to be in operation. All of you are familiar with this. But what is critical about this is that the entry point for a child to the school is now going to be 3. 5 is when the child starts with the first standard, first 5 to 6, around that. The entry point is usually what we call the pre-KG these days. But it's also the stage where Anganwadis play a very important role. Sham has already mentioned it. But the point here is that the new set of teachers, I want you to get all this very clear, please. Lots of people don't know much about all these things, and therefore you should know about these things so that you tell the others, you educate the others. The new set of teachers, in quotes, are from Anganwadis. They will join the mainstream school education. The personnel in the Anganwadis are people who are into caring for the children, taking care of them, and generally keeping them occupied. They are not academically or pedagogically trained. Well, they are literate, they have basic literacy, of course, and also numeracy, and so they do teach a few things here and there. But they are not formally people who could be considered as teachers so far. but they will be. And therefore, teachers from Anganwadis are going to be those who are with us at the entry level, which means NEP now says they will also need training. They also need to be given certain skills of teaching. This is the first challenge we have. Now, imagine our country. Imagine our learners, imagine our population, imagine our teachers, and where they are, in what corners. And imagine all of us reaching out to them and making them understand certain basic things relating to teaching. So, the first challenge would be that. Then, as we all are familiar with this, who are these teachers? We have a variety of teachers. You know that somewhere around class 1, class 2, class 3, somewhere in that region, the teachers teach up to class 4. The teachers teach all subjects, which means that all are subjects. Whatever they teach, whether it's reading, whether it's writing, including English, it's a subject. And who are these teachers? They may not be graduate, they may be graduates, but by and large, these are people who have a certificate in teaching from some institution. Maybe there are these courses called DEd, Diploma in Education. Maybe there are some of those teachers and so on. It's only from the secondary stage onwards that we will begin to have teachers with some qualification, maybe a degree, and maybe a specialization in English teaching, probably, you see, which means that we will begin to have TGTs, trained graduate teachers, and postgraduate teachers, PGTs, from about class 6 onwards. This is very important for us to remember. Now, it's possible that some of the PGTs are also postgraduates, that they hold a postgraduate degree in addition to probably a B.Ed. But the whole point is that, you see, when we think of teachers and teacher education, as the NEP visualizes, it expects all these teachers to have a certain degree of teaching, training. Now, what is this? What is the role of ELT then? Now, English language teaching or the teaching of English, as I told you, is generally as a subject, which means that when you teach English, you're focusing on reading and writing and comprehension and expression and things text, not really focusing on developing every individual skill. When you teach English as a language, then you consider skills development. And in the process, you also consider developing the sub-skills of all the skills, as you know, which means that it becomes more comprehensive the moment we think of teaching English as a language. Now, this means that teachers need to be aware of all these skills and sub-skills. This is a very heavy ask. This is not very simple, which means, you see, that the teacher's knowledge has to be very vast. The teachers should know how to develop a new language such as English, which is different from the learner's L1, mother tongue. Now, this awareness has to be built into the teachers. NEP is aware of this. And therefore, NEP says that teacher education now starts becoming very critical and very crucial. Well, both these terms that we are using today, they are, whether it's equity or inclusivity, whatever, they become very relevant from now onwards. And NEP is aware. Now, mind you, if you and I start thinking of the role of the teachers, the relevance of the teachers, and so on and so forth, you will notice that there are teachers who teach in the government schools. Good. All over the country, not just in any single place. They also teach in certain schools which are aided. And of course, we have hundreds and thousands of private institutions, which means that the NEP says that once the education policy comes into force, then automatically all schools shall follow a uniform system. Curricula, syllabus, activities, everything, all of them will be uniform. And it also says that the private institutions also shall fall in line with all other institutions. And so the expectation therefore will be that teacher training, teacher education shall be more or less very widely spread across the nation, and teachers shall be formally trained. Now, one of the very important features of teachers that we need to remember is that, mind you, in a situation like this, where we have teachers across the nation, there may be two kinds of teachers. The medium of instruction is perfectly all right, but that apart, there will be teachers who are familiar with the learner's mother tongue, and there will be teachers who are not familiar with the learner's mother tongue. This is especially true in marginalized, tribal, and other borderline areas. For example, if you're teaching in the border between two states and so on, the teachers may not know the language of the other state. Similarly, a teacher who is posted in a certain place may not know the local language, may not know the learner's language. And therefore, as we're familiar with, for example, concepts such as immersion education, for example, if it is immersion education, then the teachers should be familiar with the learner's language, mother language. And if it is submersion education, then if the teachers are not familiar and force the learners to speak in English, then that becomes another problem. And so, when it comes to teacher education, NEP is aware of these possibilities. And therefore, we'll come to the solution very soon. All that we need to say at this point of time is teachers are vastly spread across the nation geographically. And any policy, any perspective, like the NEP perspective, any policy, any perspective will have to take into consideration several of these factors. One of the major recommendations that NEP has done, which we need to understand very clearly, is related to the classroom teaching methodology. This is a big move from whatever was happening so far, where it was all transferring knowledge, transferring information, teacher-centered, teacher-oriented, and so on. So now it changes, because the focus of attention, NEP stresses, is on self-learning. Develop abilities for self-learning in the learners. Mind you, these are things which are very easy to say. But how do you encourage our learners to learn on their own? Teachers need to have certain skills and abilities for that. Help the learners learn to learn on their own. Oh my goodness, how do I do that? I never know about these things at all. There should be tasks and activities in the classroom, no lecturing. Oh my goodness, I have never done these tasks and activities. I'm so scared if the learner starts speaking. How do I stop them? Oh, you see, there are specific skills for that. The learner should be encouraged to observe, analyze, ask questions, give answers, experiential learning. Oh my goodness. See, just imagine being a teacher and being able to handle many of these things. Now, therefore, what is the need of the hour? We'll go to the last slide. I have only 2 slides, don't worry. Look at this. What is the need of the hour for teachers? What is the NEP perspectives? What are the NEP perspectives? Now, look at these things. If you and I happen to be teacher trainers, and you and I are asked, we are asked to train teachers, start training teachers. What are the things that we should do as trainers? Imagine there has to be a band of trainers who are themselves trained. We'll come to that in a minute. But if you and I are asked to start training teachers, what are we supposed to do? Number one, teachers need training in proficiency in English. If you focus on ELT, the ELT perspective, they need to be proficient in English. A new language, not a very easy thing. They also need professional development abilities. Now, one of those very important things that they need, in addition to proficiency and professional training, would be, look at the next one. We talk of what we call teacher skills and teaching skills. Saying the same thing in a slightly different fashion, but with a slightly different focus again, which is, I as a teacher should have my teacher skills, which includes proficiency, professional development, ability to cope with the methodology, new methodology, controlling the class, controlling the learner's learning, etc., etc., and my teaching skills, adopting the appropriate methodology in the classroom to develop what we have said just now, namely critical thinking, asking questions. These are not as simple as that. Developing life skills in the learners as a result of teaching of English. My God, these are not small things at all. You know, if I as a teacher, imagine going to the class tomorrow and then I tell myself, tomorrow I'm going to focus on developing the life skills. Oh, good, excellent objective. How will you do it? Oh, I'll have to think about it now. I should be able to look at the next point. I should be able to develop the language skills as well as the life skills in my learners. Now, English language skills in English. Mind you, it's not just LSRW. No, there are 3 more skills which we talk of. LSRW are what we call the basic language skills. But we also have 3 more advanced language skills, which are literary skills, study skills, and communication skills, as many of you know, which means we have to develop 7 skills in the learners in English. And this has to be done. There's not much time before they complete their class 10 and go out. And therefore, you see, the teachers have a tremendous responsibility.
Sir, excuse me.
Yes, please.
Time is up, please.
Okay. And therefore, how do we arrive at this very important notion, which is, look at that which I put in italics, professional accountability. This has been emphasized in NEP. Teachers have to be accountable. And therefore, if we have to adopt inclusivity, I would rather use the term inclusiveness, then I would, as I've suggested, there could be a bottom-up approach and a top-down approach. There will be, and this is what NEP has suggested. What is the bottom-up? The bottom-up approach is to train teachers from the cluster level. Schools will be put together into a cluster, teaching clusters, and the diets and SCRTs will start working there. Some of the better teachers among those teachers who are available will be part of the trainer group. And that is how the training will go on from there, because a cadre of trainers will need to be prepared first. And therefore, this is the bottom up. And what about the top down then? The top down will mean that it will be NCRT, Central Advisory Board in Education, EFLU, RIE, Regional Institutes of Education, all of them involved in training teachers and policy formulation. And they will also prioritize all those training related activities along with training of the trainers. And therefore, equity will simply mean a uniform curricula across the nation. A uniform curricula not just for teaching, but also for training and also for trainer training. And therefore, as far as ELT is concerned, EFLUs, RAEs, our Regional Institute of Education, all of them have a very major role to play. There is also, let us remind ourselves, not just NEP, but there is a National Curriculum Framework of 2022. And National Curriculum Framework has now declared that from class 3 onwards, teaching of English is not a subject, will be a skills development activity from there onwards, and have formulated a committee. And I happen to chair that committee at the national level, where we are working on developing curricula from classes 3, 4, 5, and then 6 to 12. This is for your information, but which means that teacher education finds an extremely important place in. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Actually, we wish to listen to you for another an hour or so, but time doesn't permit. Dear friends, we had 4 speakers who spoke on 4 diversified topics, but on the common thing of NEP 2020. You asked so many questions. We're thankful to you for that. If you have any questions, please post there. All the 4 speakers spoke on the importance of NEP and how we can ensure that there will be inclusivity and equity. Some of you did speak about the equality and different E's and I's and how different strategies can be aligned so that we can bring everybody in the mainstream. So we began with Professor Anindya Chaudhary. We have some questions, and we are happy that there were questions even before the webinar started when Professor Dr. Vandana Shinde conducted a poll. So some questions are there, and we are going to take if they are significant. So the first question is to Anindya sir. We want you to answer this question because you did talk about that. What is one thing you plan to implement in your classroom to promote greater inclusivity and equity? So this is directly related to our classroom practice. Dr. Anindya, will you please?
Yeah, but I, of course, didn't talk about classroom practices. I think, as Professor Rajgopal was referring to, and on the basis of what I do, first of all, teachers have to be aware of the diversity of the learners, diversity of the students. This appreciation of the diversity is something which is very important. This diversity, this appreciation of the diversity does not relate merely to the diverse languages which the students use in their homes. So I'm not referring to that kind of a diversity only. It could be other kinds of diversities, like for instance, ethnic diversities, or it could be, I'm thinking of my context, thinking on my feet, diversity with regard to sexual orientations maybe, right? Something which the NEP, as I said earlier, was nice to include in a way. But then there are lots of other things that need to be taken on board. I think there were certain other questions by Ipshita, if I'm not mistaken. That was right at the beginning. When I was talking, I think she posted something and raised her hand as well. Vaibhav?
Yeah. Actually, we thought that some of the questions have been already answered during the panel discussion. So we have skipped those questions.
Okay.
And I thought, since you talked about the marginalized, the transgenders, etc., how we can talk about their inclusivity in the classroom, how that can be a practice.
Yeah,
So
there is one thing, if you permit, Vaibhav, that she talks about. She talks about how she, in her own context, addresses issues pertaining to marginalized communities by offering online education. If I'm not mistaken, that was a part of a comment. But this online, of course, the NEP in one of the chapters, one of the later chapters, talks about online education. But then, one has to be realistic. I think we, in the context of what the NEP talks about, are often, more often than not, chasing chimeras. Now, one has to be very realistic. If you talk about hard data that is available from, say, NSSO, National Sample Survey Office, I'm talking about recent data, only 24% of rural, there is a big rural-urban divide here when you're talking about online education. Only 24% of rural households have access to the internet. I'm talking about hard data. And out of, this percentage of people, 24% of rural households that the, data refers to, only 14% of rural citizens use the internet actively. This is the real situation. Now, when you're talking about online education, this is something which actually becomes very challenging, I believe. Right? So, online education, all right, but access to the internet, access to smartphones, all these things that we need to consider as well, I believe. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. I want Dr. Vandana Shinde, ma'am, to answer the next question. It is very much related to you, madam. Are standardized assessment tests of English like IELTS, TOEFL, valid indicators of language proficiency in terms of equity and inclusive assessment practices?
Well, I don't say that they do, but yes, what I feel is they have been doing it for all these years. That means there is some kind of success rate which we can consider. Well, but I personally feel that yes, we need to frame our own standards. That's what should be done in India at our national level. We should have our own framework of something where we can where we can decide on the way we can measure, or we can see the difference in the students when they've actually completed a particular course. Now, my concern is that this is not happening all these years. Even if you see a person passing certain grade exams like IELTS and TOEFL, even then also in actual scenario when they are using language, probably it's not always that they are successfully doing it. But yes, the rate definitely, I must say, is better than what otherwise in our schools and colleges is happening. I mean, this is my experience. I'm not saying that it is like this, but yes, so we can have our own framework. We can have our own ways of assessment. We can, like sir also mentioned about communication skills, soft skills. Apart from this LSRW, if you go a little beyond that, we can do that, and that's quite possible. So as we have done it in our own institute when we developed the English language communication and soft skills program for the teaching fraternity in India who are in the maritime training sector. So it is going on, and we've received good feedback also from the people. In fact, people have said that there is some change. So that's what I feel. This is online. So if this happens face to face. I'm sure it is going to definitely make an impact on the, the way people move from one level to another level. So assessment has to be there in a very standardized way. And when you talk about equity, that's what I said, it is possible. It is difficult because seeing the classrooms with 40 or 60 or even more number of students, it's really difficult. That's why I mentioned teamwork. So if you have a team of teachers, and where comes the role of government supporting or the organization supporting having more teachers, the teacher and student ratio cannot be 1:40 when you're talking about a classroom where practical approach is there, activity oriented approach is there. We need to have 1:8, like how people when students go to a practical course, let's say in science, they always are like there's a ratio of 1:8. So why don't we follow the same ratio when we are teaching with English? So I feel we will have more opportunities for teachers to have, and there will be more jobs also, and there will be a change. We cannot have the same pattern, as we do a kind of a lecture mode for a language classroom. It cannot be, it cannot have any results or fruitful, output out of it. So that's what I feel. I mean, I'm sure experts can have their views also, but that's what should be done.
Thank you. Thank you so much, madam. And I wish Professor Arpita ma'am answers the next question, because she does talk about radio to be included. And that's really wonderful, because there are many schools where there is no internet facility or there are no gadgets. There is no electricity supply in tribal, rural, remote areas. So the question is regarding that. As far as language skills assessment is the yardstick at global level, but our Indian government schools and colleges don't have that infrastructure, the lab facility, the projector to meet such level of assessment, CEFR kind of. So how does NAP address this? And I wish you how we can use radio also in such situations where we are handicapped with these resources.
Well, yes, I think it is a very pertinent question, because that was the issue that I first addressed. That when we think of using technology for developing English language skills, I don't think it would be very practical for us to just think of the classroom environment. I'm always thinking of going beyond the classroom. Now, the thing is that for a practicing teacher to even think of getting his students to work beyond the classroom, because as I said, that the family environment does nourish learning, but then I know that the environment for each family is not the same. Well, that's where the equality and equity, these factors do come in, and inclusivity. Now, it's very difficult to provide infrastructure within each school, but there are good, everyone's using the mobile phone, it seems, at least many people. So if the teacher can possibly bring in a podcast or something, and use it in the classroom, and maybe those who do have the mobile phones also, the radios also over there. So it is not an obsolete tool still, It is one of the more accessible ones and the cheaper ones that I can think of right now. And of course, if schools can develop the right kind of, sessions for using the other tools like Meta and all that for more sophisticated or people who are aware of that, that's a different story. But I don't think we need to stagnate on this ground thinking that it's impossible. It is possible, because as I have seen, that the radio is one particular tool that still can be used. In fact, I asked my co-pilot also, why haven't you mentioned radio? And the co-pilot, it actually told me it's an excellent tool. That's what it said. And I still feel that, having really worked on it, that it is a very efficient tool, and we consider it to be outmoded, but it is not. So if I was privileged because the university had its own radio channel, but I think still, there are lots and lots of programs available. If we can get teachers to ask their students to listen to a podcast and then come back, or even use any other, technical gadget that they have. And the thing is, they should learn how to prompt it. That's the main thing. And that is where the teacher training, as Dr. Rajgopal has said, that's very, it is really a little too ambitious maybe right now. But I think, as we said, we have to keep moving. We have to keep thinking beyond the classroom. That's what my answer to that would be.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I wish Professor Rajgopal to answer the next question. Sir, in the context of the NEP 2020, emphasis on multilingualism and inclusivity is there. Can educators effectively balance the use of English as a medium of instruction while also respecting and incorporating students' native languages in the classroom? Anindya sir, you also can answer after Professor Rajgopal answers.
You're right. You see. That's right. Uh, you see, the learner's home language, anything is very clear about it, that right at class 5, a child's home language shall be used in the classroom. Major part of education right up to class 5 shall involve the learner's home language. That doesn't mean that there is no English medium classes at all. No, it doesn't mean that. It's that wherever the learner uses home language as a majority language in the society, and that is what is prevalent, it will be home language up to class 5. But the point here is that the learner should then be prepared to shift over to English, an English medium class, and a major English availability from class 6 onwards. Therefore, multilingual education shall exist right through. In fact, the recent document from Government of India Ministry says that mother tongue shall be available up to class 12. So, multilingual education is a built-in part of the system. But it's only a question of ratio. Will be majorly mother tongue in the initial stages, and progressively it gets withdrawn. But by the time the child comes to class 11 and 12, there are two streams. One stream will be related to literature in English, ELT. There will be a literature stream and there will be a language stream. This is to enable those who want to go for honors education. They will take the literature stream, and that's and then the language stream. And therefore, you see, it's at those stages, 11 and 12, that it will be total English in the English. Otherwise, yes, multilingual education shall be available to the child and the teachers right up to class 10. Definitely. How it's going to be proportionately distributed and so on needs to be worked out, but that will be there. In principle, yes.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Anindya sir, please respond. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Professor Rajagopal for these views. But I think if there is one big weakness of the new education policy document, it has to do with the issue of language education. In this context as well, the NEP document actually creates new categories of, say, home language. And then it equates this home language with mother language or mother tongue. And then what it does is it just uses certain slashes to talk about all of these: home language or mother language or regional language and so on and so forth. I believe this notion of the mother tongue, while it is important, this idea with regard to the mother tongue developing cognitive skills of learners at a young age and all that, this we are familiar with, but I think these ideologies are borrowed from the global north, right, which are more homogeneous with regard to population than our context. Now, if you think about the ideal kind of education being education in the home language, then in a context like mine, it becomes very difficult. You have Bengalis here, Assamese speaking people here, Hindi speaking people here, Meitei speaking, Manipuri people speaking people here, Bishnu Priyas speaking here, a lot of Bishnu Priya Manipuri people here. So which language, how many schools, how many kinds of schools would you then be having? So I
Yeah.
think this is one thing. And then what Professor Rajgopal talks about is wherever the majority language, students might wish to get education in the majority language. That sounds very problematic, because the majority language is often the quote unquote the language of the state, or the major language of the state. In that context, many people would be resisting. The mother tongues of many communities of people will then be marginalized.
You're right. Yeah.
Vis-a-vis this majority language of the state. So these are problematic issues. However, in the document, especially with regard to, if I remember correctly, with regard to science and mathematics teaching, the document talks about how that, could be done in English after a certain level. So I think, while this mother tongue education, certainly, the availability of books in the different languages, that's a welcome step. But, one should not raise the boogie of English, which has been a favorite pastime of politicians, especially in northern India. So English, as Dr. Arpita Bannerji mentioned in a talk, in a session, that let it be considered at least as a language of convenience.
Yeah.
Okay, let us not marginalize English, or think of even marginalizing English in the context of this whole discussion with regard to mother tongue education. Thank you. We have to take on board the diversity, which is very important. I've talked about my context. The diversity is very in this. The context of diversity. It is very important to reconsider certain notions with regard to mother tongue education in our context. Thank you.
Very well said. Very well said. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Diversity is. Yeah. Yes,
Can I respond for 2 minutes?
Please, sir. A half minute, please.
Half a minute. Thank you, Anindya. Which is very good. Northeast is a major problematic area, linguistically speaking. So therefore, one of those things that NEP has mentioned is that teachers who know the learner's mother language will get preference in their posting in those areas. So they will teach English, but the plus point is that they know the child's mother tongue also. And therefore, you see, whatever be the curricular framework, it's likely to benefit those children thanks to those teachers who are likely to know their several languages and so on. Probably, as you know, with regard to immersion education, progressively, since they are given time up to class 5, probably this may work in a certain way. This is all hypothetical, but needs to be looked into. And as you said, very, very true. Thank you very much.
Thank you. 100 people have left us. To conclude, though there are many things to be discussed, because when we are talking about artificial intelligence, we are talking about diversity and inclusivity, equity, etc. There are many, many things that are challenging for us. India is such a diversified country where uniformity is very difficult to get in. But as Professor Rajgopal said, that it's the role of the teacher, it's up to the teachers to work harder and smarter to bring in more uniformity amidst the storms of diversity, inequality, injustice, etc. NEP is definitely a very welcome step and revolutionary step, because we have changed the things after a very, very long time. And always we talk about the digital divide, the Bharat and India kind of things. And so somewhere we have been trying to bridge the gap between the both. And we are trying through our constitutional norms also to ensure that there will be equality, equity, inclusivity, and nobody will remain untouched from education. Nobody remains away from education, so that inclusive education is ensured. So we had these deliberations today. We are very much thankful for all the resource persons, the panelists, Honorable Professor Anindya Chaudhary, Dr. Vandana Shinde, Professor Dr. Arpita Bannerji, and Professor Dr. Rajgopal. We are very much thankful to you for your insights on these issues. I hope all the participants have been benefited from this. Now, I request the host, Professor Dr. Rahul Kale, for the vote of thanks and other formalities. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sabnis, for handling the session so well. What an engaging and thought-provoking discussion that we have had today. It was truly a feast for our ears. On behalf of ELTAI, I'd like to extend my heartfelt thanks to all the distinguished panelists, those who have shared their time and insights with us. I also thank Dr. Sabnis for moderating this session and offering his expert remarks. I thank him for handling the session. Well, behind the scenes, there is always a dedicated team that works tirelessly to ensure the success of these webinars. I thank all the seniors, mentors for their valuable inputs and timely suggestions. A special thanks to Kavin, my colleague and a backbone of organizing team, for his hard work and commitment to organizing these webinars. Last but not least, a heartfelt thank to all the participants from abroad and all corners of India for participating in these discussions, for raising questions and sharing their views in the chat box. Well, it's very nice to see that even now we have more than 100 participants with us. That is really very commendable. Please don't forget to fill out the feedback form. You will receive the certificates in 10 days' time, very soon. Ladies and gentlemen, before I wrap up, a few more announcements. Please bear with me. Please mark your calendars and save the date for our next insightful webinar that is scheduled on Sunday, September 22nd. It will be delivered by Dr. Romil Tabula, from Thailand. And he'll be talking about integrating the 6 Qs, transforming teaching with activity-based learning. The poster is already there on your screens. I look forward to meeting all of you for the next webinar as well. Registration details are already there in the chat box, and it will be there on our website too. Another important update about our annual conference or international conference that we are going to organize next month. The theme of the conference is exploring languages and literatures for evolving pedagogical practices. This conference promises to be a remarkable event, and it is scheduled to take place from October 23rd to 26th at the Royal Global University, Guwahati, Assam. And we look forward to meeting you there. Please submit your abstracts by 10th of September 2024. The deadline will not be extended any further. So please register your abstracts at www.eltaiconferences.in. We look forward to meeting you at the conference. Friends, please remember that your participation is not only very encouraging, but it is also essential for our success of any of our events. So let us continue on our journey of professional development together. Now it's time for group photograph. I request everyone to turn their videos on so that we can take a quick group photograph here.
Yeah.
I request everyone to please turn their videos on. Let's have a group photograph here. If everybody's ready, may I click a photograph? Let's say cheese. A broad smile, please. Yeah, I'll take one more. One more time, please. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for giving us this wonderful.
What is the
Thank you.
program?
Thank you very much.
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you
Take
very
care.
much.
See you
Bye-bye.
soon.
Bye.